Well, hello and welcome to episode 8 of The Visible Workplace. My name is Dr. Tom Rolley, and today we're going to have a look at an interesting topic, the history of the magic board. The magic board, this interesting concept that arose because of some great difficulties in my life, and we'll look at those. And how did I even end up there, and where is it going? So the magic board represents to me an ability for us in business and in life to get things done better because of one simple fact. We're bringing the instructions and putting them with the results. So we want a result, we're going to have the instructions there. And one of the features of human beings is that we can say, hey, I want this result, and we're going to create a way to do that. And that is awesome. It's so helpful for us to be able to do that. But if you're trying to do it repeatedly and consistently, then it really helps if we document what we do. There's another benefit of having documentation, and that is that we can take other people's learning, other people's experience, and use that documentation, their documentation, what they found worked, and put it in a magic board, and then we can use it in our lives, which is really powerful. But you might have a question. Well, Tom, where did these magic boards come from? Why are they called that? And for that, we're going to have a little trip down memory lane. And this journey probably begins best back in 2008. Had an idea for a while for a medical education company called Graduate Medicine. And this arose from the new medical schools. The new medical schools were a move away from the 6 years of medical study and instead saying, hey, we're going to take postgraduate students who've had some life experience and give them a 4-year course. And they're going to be better learners, faster learners, more experienced. We're going to teach them using problems, and it's all going to be awesome. Now, this was back in the days of the original tech boom. We're talking 1997, 98, 99. So a long time ago. And at the time, we had some Word docs. Essentially, they were like, hey, we're going to take some Word docs and stick them up on the internet. You guys are going to learn from that. And it was not quite the multimedia experience that perhaps it was promoted to be. But nonetheless, the idea was like, hey, tech and medicine are going to come together in some way. I'm going to start this up. Fast forward 6 years, and my wife and I are returning from Ireland. We're not married yet, but we've been in Ireland for a couple of years, and we go to some business coaches up at Action Coaching, and we're like, hey, we want to do this. And they were like, well, before you do that, how about you get some experience with business? And so we ended up with a web franchise called Bloom Tools, running out of the Gold Coast. Great business, gets you an integrated website, gets you integrated database database marketing, and CRM, all in one. Hosted stably, very good business. And so we jumped in, my wife and I jumped in, and we're doing Bloom Tools, and I'm doing medicine and consulting for Bloom Tools as a web designer. They would take care of all the design, all the Photoshop. We just had to sell. And it was a good experience. It was a great experience. My wife did really well. I did less well, mainly because I was split too many ways. Doing medicine and doing business was hard. This was a repeating theme through my life. So we go forward a couple more years, and I go through my exams for GP. And I go through and watch everyone do the same thing, which was go to the textbook, make as many notes as they could. I got through about half the book in a year, plus all my experience in medicine, sat the exams, passed, and went, gee, that was probably not the greatest experience of all time. Why? Because there was simply no leverage on the textbook. That everybody struggled with the amount of work in these textbooks, as well as working, as well as families. And so most of us were putting in 400 hours of study, making the notes, and then sitting the exams very stressful. And I was like, you know what, maybe we could do this a little better. And this is when graduate medicine began. Basically, my wife bet me a carton of beer. She's like, you've been talking about this for so long. If you do this, I'll get you a carton of beer, which may not have been the greatest idea for starting a business. But nonetheless, I was like, you know what? I have been talking about this for a long time. I am going to get after it. And it was a success. Started selling. I'd been doing some internet marketing for some time, following the likes of Brendan Burchard and Jeff Walker and Frank Kern and Ryan Dice and these people teaching how to sell on the internet. And off I went with graduate medicine, passed the exams, and it worked. And it was going well. And in the early stages, it was a total blue ocean. It was amazing. I put $1 into advertising and pull out $31. We put in like $1,000 and I made $31,000. And I'm like, whoa, that was pretty amazing. And this went on for maybe 2 years or so, but there was a problem. And some of you in business may well know this, and that is I started creating competitors. They were like, hey, there's some money here. This looks okay. I'm going to jump in as well. And so they did. And they jumped in and we got more competitors, but the problem being that the market for pass the exams is pretty small. We're talking like 1,000 people a year. It's not enough to support 15 different businesses. And at this time, I wanted to expand. I was like, you know what? This is going well. We've got momentum. We've got good products. And I was severely exposed. Instead of going into marketing and sales and advertising, I went into fulfillment. And I was like, you know what? What I could do is get some doctors to help build the products, and then I'll have more time to do the advertising and sales. What I failed to know was that running a team was going to take a whole lot more time than I expected. And suddenly I'm running the team, paying for fulfillment. Doctors are not cheap. Watching a lot of money go out the door and not have anybody doing advertising and sales. This was a recipe for disaster, and graduate medicine crashed. I'm like, stop. This is not working. I am doing something wrong here. So there was another problem as well. And this was that graduate medicine meant that pass the exams became my life. And every 6 months, all of the students would go through their exams, and these are high-stakes exams, expensive. And if you pass, then there's a lot of reward on the other side. You get to be a fully qualified GP. You can live where you want. You can access all of Medicare instead of half of Medicare. The stakes were high. People who passed were ecstatic. People who failed were demoralized. It was very hard emotionally on me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not winning business-wise. I'm not winning and enjoying going through everybody's exams. Stuff this. So this must have been around maybe 2017, 2018. But in the end of 2017, something happened. I had joined a podcast. I'd been listening to this thing called The Daily Fuel with Garrett J. White. And he's like, hey, you know, if you're an entrepreneur and you've got kids and you're married, then you should come and join my program. And I was like, well, gee, I'm not sure if I'm an entrepreneur or not. And just put that one in the toilet, and that isn't going so well. So, but I was married and I did have kids, and I was like, oh, you guys know how to do marriage? You know how to do kid? This is good. And I bought in. In a hilarious episode of Irrational Thinking, I refused the $100 book. I'm like, books don't cost $100. And this book was $100. And then around came Black Friday, November 2017. And in a great gift of expansion of the, I don't know how, like basically the offer was 2 books and 1 audio copy of the book for $100. Wouldn't buy 1 book at $100, but would buy 2 books and an audio copy of the same book for $100. If you don't see the irrationality of this, then that's okay. I didn't either, but I got the 2 books and I got the audio. And I'm like, hey, hang on, the book is the same. The 2 books are the same. The content is what I was after. It's the same content available at $100, but nonetheless, I bought. And I was in and I went through this program. And at the time, it was about core 4, this idea that if I did certain things each day, then I could reverse engineer production, that I would have enough power generated to get the stuff done that needs to be done. If I exercised every day, if I meditated every day, if I cared for my family and displayed that to them with notes or audio or video, and I studied each day, that this would give me power. And we're going to take that power and put it into production and get some stuff done. And this was Wake Up Warrior. And we went along. I was like, this is wonderful. This was my second men's program. My first one, Mankind Project, still a part of that, still a part of Wake Up Warrior. And we hit COVID. By that time, it was weird because WarriorCon 4, a conglomeration of all the men in this program, had been cancelled in October 2019, and instead they ran a program small group called Be the Man. And at the end of that was an offer to join the Council of Kings, a online program for 2020. And I was like, hell yeah, I'll join that. And I went in, did that, and they had a couple of other upsells into war rooms, small groups, 6-man coaching, very intensive. And at the end of that was an experience. It involved getting up at 2 a.m. in Australia, which was pretty brutal. It was a 8 a.m. start in California, and it went for 12 hours. So I'm up at 2 a.m. and I'm like, whoa, pretty delirious, and passing out at sort of 4:30 and get some sleep and kind of continue on and then repeat that the next day. And towards the end of the second day, Garrett got on and gave a presentation. And he's like, you know what? I've come to realize one thing, and that is get in process before people. Get process in before people. And what he meant by that was if you just bring in more people and you don't have any documentation for what they are going to do, your business will struggle. You will now have a whole bunch of people that you're paying that are coming to you to ask you what to do. And he said, stop this, don't do this. I just did this. It was very expensive. It was very exhausting. It didn't work. Get your processes in before your people. And I was like, you know what? That's a pretty good idea. I'd already been exposed to this idea of processes and systems before in Bloom Tools, as well as some reading around classics like E-Myth, that the systems that you use to run a business make a difference. And so this Council of Kings, I take this little bit of knowledge, processes before people, and then 2 weeks later, something happens. I was struggling at this time. There's no doubt about it. I'm pretty burnt out. I've been a GP for 10 years. I'm seeing like 4 per hour with fit-ins, a lot of very difficult patients, and I have no awareness or limited awareness that I'm struggling. All I know is that I'm not really enjoying the work anymore. I've since found out there are burnout assessments that you can take. And if you are in the medical field or you're in a profession and you're not taking a monthly burnout tracker, then I would recommend that you do. Really helpful. A lot better than tanking the whole thing or going through what I went through. So I get an argument with another doctor. They're like, hey, you messed up. And I'm like, yeah, I messed up. Yeah. And stop being so mean to me. And they didn't like this. They didn't like this at all. They were like, I'm not being mean to you. I'm like, well, you kind of are. You're not perfect either. You know, you occasionally make a mistake. And they're like, nope. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I call them on this. And this did not go well. This did not go well at all. I'm like, hey, you're being abusive of power. And this went down like a lead balloon. And so about 3 or 4 months later, which puts us right 2 weeks after this Council of Kings event, I get an email from APRA. APRA is the medical registration in Australia. They look after all of the nurses and the acupuncturists and physios and all the allied health people, and everyone has to be registered. The dentists, they all have to be registered with APRA. Now, APRA has its own problems, but it is certainly not a wonderful experience. It's a horrible experience. And anyone who's been through it will generally say, yeah, that was a really horrible experience. Anyway, I get this report. It's 8 pages of complaints. I'm like, whoa, hang on, 8 pages. And they want a report in 2 weeks. And I call them up and they're like, okay, get an extension. Pull all the notes. There's 2,500 pages of notes to go through. This was designed to be impossible to complete, but luckily I've been trained in how to get stuff done, and I knew basically it was just like, okay, sit down in the morning and work and work and work. And I would work for 12 to 14 hours a day, building a idea of what had gone on with these patients, putting the pieces together. It's all out of order. It's a giant mess. Work through one. Okay, that one's kind of done. Move to the next. But I've never done this before. And so I failed to ask a very critical question, which was, hey, what should this report be about? The lawyers were just like, hey, write a report for us. And I'm like, writing the report. And they're like, well, this report's not what we want. And I've just put like 7 days of heavy work in. And they're like, actually, no. You're describing what's happened. We want to know what you were thinking. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're kidding me. Okay, righto. So I've got to review again. And what would happen is that I would have this 5, 6, 7 days of intensive work on this legal problem. And then I would have like 5, 6, 7 days of time off. But I'm in this altered state, essentially 10, 12, 14 hours a day, just working on these legal, like putting it together, what's gone on, different doctors, notes saying this, what's the results, is a giant mess. Very, very, very difficult. But in that downtime, my brain is quite elevated. Not elevated, it's in a different place. And I was talking to a psychologist friend of mine. They said, there is some evidence that says that when adults are placed under extreme stress, that the brain will revert to a more childlike experience. And what I took from that is that the childlike experience is that it's more open to possibilities. It's less defined around how the world is. And in this, I took on a particular question. And I knew that we'd had this processes before people, and I've been really interested in systems and processes, and no one really seemed to know what a system was. Or we did know what processes were. It's like, do this, but what's a system? And I came up with this question. And it was a bit of a horrible question. Oh, actually, you know what? I forgot to mention. The day after I received the notification, I'm like pretty pissed off. I'm pretty angry. Don't really appreciate how angry I am. And we had some dirt that needed to be moved on our property on this thing called a dingo. You stand on the back of it, drive it around. They're really dangerous. They're really dangerous. I didn't know that. Anyway, so I've got the dirt in. I'm having a great time. I'm like, far out. This is awesome. I got this big problem in my life, but I get to move some dirt around, and then the thing flips. And it's like maybe 3/4 of a ton of a machine. And as I go up, I get this split second. It says jump, and I miss it. And then I fall backwards, and my foot gets caught on this cowling that comes up from the dingo. And then the pain rips through my leg as I pass out. I let go, fall on my head, smash my shoulder, and rip my ankle apart. So now I have a 8-page APA report and a severe ankle injury, head injury, and shoulder injury. And I'm like, wow. And I was sitting there after this because I kind of planned to get into the report. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to watch The Mandalorian. So I got to watch The Mandalorian. I'd been putting it off. I'm like, no, I don't have time. I've got so much on. And I like watched the first 3 episodes of The Mandalorian. It was a very odd experience. But coming back This idea that the psychologist said that under extreme stress, the adult brain can go back to a more childlike experience. And it opened me up to, hey, almost a different learning experience. And I sat with this question. And the question was, what is the system that makes systems? What is the system to make a system? But this was a problem because I didn't know what a system was. Like, it'd be really great if I knew what a system was and then I could create the system to make the systems, but I didn't know what the system was. So I was like, okay. It's almost like one of those cones, I think they're called, koans. Like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? The system for systems. And I looked up definitions, and there's all sorts of weird stuff around what a system is. I began to kind of question about whether anyone even knew what a system was. But in this sitting there for 2 days, there was this 2-day period of like 12 to 14 to 16 hours where I'm just working through this. And I knew that processes were part of it. And this idea came that I was going to start tracking the processes. Now, typically in project management, you're going to track the results. But I had this idea of putting in the processes and tracking them. And I began to see that when I executed on these track processes, I got the results. And I saw this link between tracked, doesn't have to be tracked, but between the processes and the results. And this was quite an unusual experience because usually in business, we have over here on one side, project management, what we're creating, what the results are, where are they up to, where's the Gantt, when's it due, who's responsible. And over here on this other side, we've got these SOPs, standard operating procedures, also known as the instructions or the processes. And there's not a lot of joining. There was no link between them. And I began to see that, hang on. We've got processes creating results. And I started to see this idea that the processes created consistent results. And so I added in the results below the tracked processes. And now I had tracking for the processes and tracking for the results. And it evolves. And I'm like, well, maybe we could have a due date. That's probably pretty important. A lot of people in business are going to need some due dates. Hey, when's this due by? And who's responsible? Let's put down who's responsible. And it'd be really helpful if we could link to stuff. How do I quickly find the detailed instructions for the processes? Or how do I find the results in Google Drive or in a software that I'm using? And so this design kind of dropped in. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Not seen this before. And I do think that it only arose because of the incredible stress that I was under and the experience of this 5, 6, 7 days of intensive work with the lawyers, hand over the report for them to review, and then these big gaps. And just having this focus, I'm like, what am I going to do? I suppose I can watch some more Mandalorian, but I was like, you know what? That probably isn't the greatest use of my time. I didn't really know what was going on at all. I just happened to have this experience. And in the early days, I kind of got this system for systems. And I was like, oh, okay, hang on. So if we know that the system has processes and results, then what I'll do is have a kind of a meta layer above that where the result is the system. And so we'd have processes for creating the processes and the results. And what I saw was that this was only a variation of the magic board. And in the end, I decided to get rid of the meta bit and just go, all right, well, what are the results that we want? What are the templates that would give us those results, if any? What are the instructions to use those templates to get the results? And suddenly the system for making a system became apparent. And I went along and further insights started coming. Like as I started to use them, I'm like, hang on, I can get a lot of stuff done with this because I'm not doing things that don't count, not wasting time making mistakes or losing things. And I began to see that templates could be copied and the original would stay pristine and the copy could be used, or I could use a form that was that template locked in and I fill in the form and it would create a template with the details filled in. And it was hard to keep it organized, so then I aligned the folder structures to match up to the areas of business, the marketing and the sales and the advertising, the fulfillment, the optics and the people, and the accounting and the taxes and the cash. And these came from Warrior, but the systems and processes now began to make sense. And I would read books and go, hang on, this is a system for getting this result. Sometimes they're called funny things like frameworks. Here's my framework. And I'm like, dude, that's a system. Do this, do this, do this, and you'll get this result and this result for $30. Most people read the book and it stays in the book because they have no way of effectively getting that system into their business. And so this idea began. And I began sharing it. I was like, hey, do this and do this. But what I ran into was a problem. There's still a lot of copying that has to happen, a lot of movement of files to keep them organized. And I learned pretty quickly that this was going to need software. Now, software, for those of you who aren't software developers, it looks awesome. It looks awesome, but it is very difficult. Many, many, many traps in software. It's typically very expensive. It's very difficult to progress. There's a lot of bugs. There's people typing. It's a difficult game. And I gave up. Gave up for a while. It's like, can't do the software, too expensive. I'm a doctor, I'm not a venture capitalist, I've never raised money before. And it was weird because my brother-in-law is in that game. He's not, he's a property developer, but he's like, hey, we're developing software, we raised all this money. I'm like, dude, how'd you do that? He's like, we did this, this, and this. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But the real game changer was not the learning how to get money, but rather I had 1 week, must have been maybe, was it late in 22? Probably late in 22. And 3 people in 1 week all come to me and say, hey, Tom, have you heard about this bubble thing? They're using no code. It's called no code. And I'm like, what? And like, yeah. Some smart person went along and said, hey, why don't we take these bits of code and make it into a button and make it into a back end where you can select stuff and it will talk to a database, and instead of having to type out all this code, you can just choose the buttons. And when I heard that, I was like, you know what, maybe this is possible again. And so of the time of recording, not there yet, still coming. I messed it up once. Messed it up once again. It's like, great, let's use no code. But I went to a third world country. It's a lot cheaper. But here was my learning. Software requires creativity. It requires skill sets that are better handled in Western trained minds. I know that might be judgmental. If you're triggered by that, hey, okay, whatever. That was my experience. I'm sure there's some awesome teams where it's like, no, we know exactly what we're doing and we can do it at a quarter of the price, but that wasn't my experience. It was a big mess. And I resigned myself to say, you know what, I'm just going to pay for quality. And we're in that process, and this software is coming. And it's kind of exciting to see that magic boards could be installed and people will not need to know about the copying or the management of the back end. All they'll need to do is press a button and up will come a copy of this system. But this creation, this history of the magic boards, well, it was an unusual experience. Guarantee you that it was very painful at the time. Very painful at the time. Between the emotional pain of the difficulties of being reported as a doctor to APRA and the physical pain of my ankle, shoulder, and head and neck, it's like, oh, it was a doozy. But out of it came this very interesting idea. And I am not convinced that without these experiences of pain and difficulty and suffering that I would have got there. No guarantee at all. But because of the stress and strain and the workload and just the difficulty of it all, it almost opened me up to have these ideas downloaded in. That's really what it was like. It was very like a downloading of ideas, and I would be shown, hey, why don't you start tracking the processes? And, oh, hang on, you're seeing these consistent results. Why don't you add those results in? And why don't you make a clean version of this and then copy it in order to use it? And it was a very receptive experience from beyond. So we're coming to the end of this podcast. We've been going around 32 minutes or something. So I hope you got some value out of it. I hope you took some ideas around both the psychology of adult brains under extreme stress, but more importantly, how did this thing show up? And that perhaps one of the big pieces for you is that bringing the instructions and the results together is a very valuable experience. If you want some more information on how to do this, then head over to magicboards.io with an S, magicboards.io, and you can get some more information about how to do this, recommendations on software, all that sort of stuff. Hopefully later on, have my own magic board software that will bring a lot of benefits for you in business, both accessing existing systems as well as giving you a very clean production ability in your business so that you can get things done with your team fast, effectively, and done correctly. Thank you so much for joining me for this podcast. I hope you got a lot of value, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one, episode 9. And if you do know someone who is struggling with this, then share it up. If you're enjoying the podcast, then make sure you hit the subscribe button. And I look forward to seeing you on episode 9 of The Visual Workplace. See you then. Thanks for joining us at The Visual Workplace. This is a notification that the information and ideas discussed here are general in nature and do not take into account your specific circumstances. You should seek specialist advice for any medical, financial, emotional, mental, or other difficulties that you are facing with appropriate specialists and professionals so that they can apply your specific circumstances and give you the required advice. Thank you for joining us, but this is also a notification that all information is indeed general in nature and not specific for your personal circumstances.